Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are taking on, well, a monumental historical task.
Monumental's right.
We're synthesizing the rise, structure, and collapse of two huge classical empires, India's Mauryan and Gupta dynasties, and China's Han dynasty.
Yeah, that's nearly 750 years we're covering, roughly 202 BC up to 8535. It's a lot.
It is. And our goal here is to give you a clear map, really extract those groundbreaking bits, the tech, the philosophy that genuinely shaped global history.
And it's such a critical period because, even though they were separated by the Himalayas, these two major powers were pretty much simultaneously developing these blueprints for centralized states, blueprints that lasted in many ways for millennia.
Right, so you see common threads.
Definitely. Highly structured administration, lots of innovation, and embracing global trade early on, like with the Silk Roads.
But contrasts too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Fascinating contrast. India, often diving deep into philosophical and spiritual evolution, while Han China was intensely focused on, let's say, material technology and building that bureaucratic machine.
And we have a unique mission today. As we dissect these very precise administrative structures they use to control millions, we're actually going to pivot. We're going to look at an unexpected bit of source material.
Yeah, this is interesting. A structural guide for effective communication.
Exactly. We'll use this blueprint to help you organize the, frankly, vast amount of knowledge we're about to cover. So it's not just a deep dive into history.
It's a deep dive into efficient thinking, too.
Yeah.
If the Han needed a system to organize their government, you need a system to organize the knowledge about it.
So we master the history, and you get a tool for structuring your own analysis.
That's the plan. Master the content, master the structure.
Okay, let's unpack this. Starting in India, the first great imperial foundation, the Mauryan Empire. How did this huge, previously fragmented subcontinent actually get unified back in 321 BC?
Well, it kicked off with a real act of political will by Chandragupta Maurya.
Yeah.
And the initial challenge wasn't just, beating local kings. He had to take on foreign power. First, he defeated a powerful king in eastern India, grabbed the throne, and then, boom, marched northwest to challenge Seleucus.
Seleucus, one of Alexander the Great's generals, right? His successor.
Exactly. So this was a huge statement, pushing out that Hellenistic influence, consolidating India under native rule for the first time on this kind of scale. It was massive.
Okay, so you've brought together this enormous territory. Holding on to it, though, the sources suggest extreme centralization and a punishing financial commitment.
Oh, absolutely. It was pure top-down centralization, strict control from the center. And how did they fund it?
Agriculture.
Agriculture. But with a heavy, heavy levy. Farmers had to pay a tax equal to 1/2 of their crop each year.
Half. Wow, that's staggering.
It is. Imagine that burden. But that sheer wealth funded an immense standing army, essential for keeping order internally and, deterring threats from outside.
And managing that vast area needed more than just an army and taxes. It needed structure, scaffolding.
Absolutely. Meticulous administrative scaffolding. The empire was split into 4 big provinces, each ruled by a prince, basically the emperor's direct representative.
But the oversight didn't stop there.
Not at all. It went deeper, provinces were broken down further, officials were strictly supervised, constantly traveling, assessing taxes, making sure everyone followed the central government's very strict laws. It was sophisticated, definitely, but harsh, a very top-down model.
It sounds incredibly rigid, almost like a military operation running a country. But then the story shifts quite dramatically with Chandragupta's grandson, Asoka.
Ah, Asoka, yes. Around 269 BC. His story is really the inflection point for the Mauryan Empire.
He started out warlike, though, didn't he?
Just like his grandfather. His big early campaign was conquering Kalinga on the east coast. But the sources say the violence, the bloodshed there, it was just so profound, so traumatizing for him.
It led to a crisis.
A deep spiritual crisis, yeah. He saw the human cost of building an empire, and eventually he accepted the teachings of the Buddha.
So this conversion wasn't just personal. It became state policy almost immediately.
Instantly. It fundamentally changed how he saw imperial power. He basically vowed to stop conquest and rule through morality, through fairness, the most radical part.
Religious toleration.
Religious toleration, exactly.
Yeah.
And this wasn't just passive acceptance. He issued laws actively urging people to accept the right of others to hold different beliefs. Hindu, Jain, various Buddhist sects. Think about that. An emperor with absolute power, using it to promote acceptance and nonviolence.
Yeah.
Revolutionary for the time.
And he's still focused on the practical stuff, too, infrastructure.
Oh, yes. He knew you still needed to run the empire effectively. He built extensive roads, well-marked roads, which wasn't just for the military. It helped trade, communication.
Made life easier for everyone.
Right. He planted shade trees along them, dug wells, set
Mhm.
up rest houses. It showed a real commitment to the welfare of the average traveler. He really brought the empire to its peak, both geographically and, morally.
But the classic story. Empires built on one leader's personal morality often struggle after they're gone.
And that's what happened here. The sources are clear. Soon after Ashoka died in 232 BC, the empire just collapsed.
Leading to half a millennium of fragmentation, 500 years. What was that like?
Messy. A long period of regional powers popping up and lots of external pressure. Central India had the Andhra Dynasty, which brought some stability there. But the Northwest, it became like a revolving door.
Invaders.
Wave after wave.
Mhm.
Greeks, Persians, Central Asians pushed into India, often fleeing their own conflicts.
How did that constant influx change India? Did it dilute the culture or?
It was more like a crucible. Yes, it destabilized politics, but it added incredible richness. Languages, architecture, philosophy.
Mhm.
The Northwest especially became this fascinating Greco-Indian or Hellenistic Indian hybrid zone.
And we can't forget the South during all this.
Critically important. While the North was fragmented, the Tamil people in the South, they maintained powerful kingdoms, often fighting each other, yes, but with their own distinct language, their own deep cultural traditions, real continuity outside that northern imperial cycle.
Okay, so 500 years pass. Fragmentation, conflict, cultural mixing. Who finally pulls India back together for the next big act, the Gupta Golden Age?
That would be Chandragupta Seft, around AD 320. And crucially, no relation to the first Chandragupta.
Right, new dynasty, starting fresh.
Exactly. He set up his power base very strategically in the Ganges River Valley, the heartland, really. Wealth, population. It let him dominate the region pretty quickly.
And his successors really pushed the expansion, didn't they? Samudragupta and Chandragupta II. What made them so successful militarily, and how did they lock down the empire's economy?
Samudragupta was a powerhouse conqueror, yeah. Expanded the territory dramatically over 40 years, but he was also a big patron of the arts, which really cemented the dynasty's cultural prestige.
And Chandragupta II?
He secured the economic future. He defeated the Shakas, these rivals in western India. Why was that so important? Ports. Gaining that territory gave them control of critical ports on the Indian Ocean.
Which connects them to?
Southwest Asia, the Mediterranean, the Roman Empire. Suddenly, the Guptas are controlling the western end of that incredibly lucrative maritime spice and textile trade. Huge flow of foreign money coming in.
So conquest plus strategic gains. Any other methods?
Yeah, they were smart. They also used diplomatic marriage alliances to shore up their borders. A bit more nuanced, perhaps, than just the raw power approach of the early Mauryans.
Let's talk about daily life. For the average person, the farmer in a Gupta village, what were their obligations to the state?
Well, most Indians were still farmers, and they still carried the weight of supporting the state, though maybe not quite as brutally as under the first Chandragupta. They paid a portion of their crop as tax, yes?
But there was more.
There was also a labor tax. Every peasant had to set aside time each month, mandatory time, to work on community resources. Building dams, irrigation canals, maintaining public wells. It was the mechanism, the structure, ensuring that essential infrastructure got built and maintained.
You mentioned North versus South earlier, especially regarding family structure. This seems like a really important counterpoint to the sort of universal power models we often focus on.
It's absolutely critical. It shows the real diversity within India, northern India. Overwhelmingly patriarchal. Father's the head of the family. Power, property, lineage, all through the male line. Standard stuff for many empires.
But the South was different, specifically the Tamils.
Sometimes, yes, in the Deep South, particularly among certain Tamil groups, the structure could be matriarchal.
And what does matriarchal actually mean in practice, in terms of power?
It means the mother is the head of the family, and crucially, property and sometimes even political power, the throne passed through the female line.
That changes everything for women's roles.
Fundamentally, women become central to inheritance, to economic continuity. It's a fascinating structural alternative to those hyper-centralized, male-dominated models we see in the North, and as we'll see in Han China too. Suggests a kind of indigenous resilience, a different way of organizing society.
But even with this wealth, sophistication, maybe even some regional flexibility, the Gupta Empire eventually followed that familiar pattern, decline.
Sadly, yes. After Chandragupta II died, around AD 535, the pressure mounted again. Invaders, especially the Hunas from Central Asia, started pushing in hard.
And the center couldn't hold.
The Central Gupta authority just weakened. The empire fractured again into smaller regional kingdoms, the end of that era of broad centralization.
Okay, before we shift fully to China, we absolutely have to pause on the non-political legacy of this whole Mauryan Gupta period in India. I mean, a true golden age. Religion evolved, science just exploded.
It really did.
Yeah.
Achieving things the West wouldn't match for, in some cases, 1,000 years.
Let's start with religion. We saw Ashoka embrace Buddhism, but by the Gupta era, Buddhism itself was changing, wasn't it?
It was. The original teachings, focusing on strict self-denial, individual discipline to reach enlightenment, well, that felt pretty unattainable for the average person, the farmer, the artisan.
A spiritual distance developed.
Exactly. And that led to a major split, a schism, that really reshaped the religion and its cultural expression.
This is the Mahayana versus Theravada split.
Precisely. The Mahayana sect, the great vehicle, emerged. This is the popular, more expansive version. It offered salvation to everyone through worship, through good works.
And the key concept was the bodhisattva.
Yes, the bodhisattvas. These enlightened beings who chose to delay their own nirvana to stay and help others reach salvation. It made the faith so much more accessible, more devotional, compared to the older Theravada sect, which kept that strict focus on individual spiritual discipline, often within monasteries.
And how did that shift play out in art and architecture?
Massive impact. It inspired a huge wave of public art, things designed for popular devotion. We see these incredible cave temples just covered in elaborate sculptures and paintings, and the construction of stupas.
Those large mounded structures.
Right. Built over holy relics, they became centers for popular meditation, for worship. The visual arts were suddenly this powerful tool for spreading the new, more accessible Mahayana ideas.
And meanwhile, Hinduism was also adapting, becoming more personal.
It was.
Mhm.
Hinduism traditionally had, a vast pantheon of gods, incredibly complex priestly rituals. During this period, it began to sort of consolidate its focus, you could say.
Still many gods, but
So many gods, but many Hindus started emphasizing devotion to three main figures. This powerful, relatable trinity: Brahma, the creator; Vishnu, the preserver, the protector; and Shiva, the destroyer, the transformer.
making it more devotional.
More devotional, more personal. It echoed that same trend towards mass appeal we saw in Mahayana Buddhism. Easier for people to connect with emotionally.
Okay, now the science. This is where the Gupta achievements often seem almost startlingly advanced for the time.
They really were, especially in astronomy. Indian astronomers proved the Earth was round
How?
by observing the curved shadow the Earth cast on the moon during a lunar eclipse. Simple observation, brilliant deduction. And this was 1,000 years before Columbus sailed. They were mapping the cosmos with incredible precision for the era.
And the mathematics, foundational doesn't even cover it.
Foundational is right.
Yeah.
They invented the concept of zero. Think about that. The placeholder, the nothing, that makes all advanced math possible. And the decimal system, we still use it every day.
Incredible. What else?
They calculated the value of pi to several decimal places, figured out the lengths of the solar year with amazing accuracy. They formalized the solar calendar, the 7-day week, dividing the day into hours. These weren't just small tweaks. They were fundamental structural breakthroughs in how humans understood quantity and time.
And medicine, too. Necessary for a large population.
Absolutely. Gupta doctors were highly skilled. Texts show they knew over 1,000 diseases, used hundreds of complex plant-based medicines. The sources even hint at advances in surgery, maybe even forms of inoculation.
And culturally. Beyond science.
A huge flourishing. The classical form of Indian dance was founded then, and literature.
This is where Kalidasa comes in.
Kalidasa.
Yeah.
Considered one of India's absolute greatest poets and playwrights. Wrote these beautiful, elegant works in Sanskrit, celebrating the era's culture, its faith. But it wasn't just him.
Academies.
Writing academies thrived. Like in Madurai, down south, we still have over 2,000 Tamil poems from that period, documenting that vibrant regional culture.
And all this intellectual ferment, this cultural explosion, it had to be funded. Which brings us back to trade, the Silk Roads.
The commerce engine, exactly. India was perfectly positioned geographically, right in the middle of the Eurasian landmass.
The middlemen.
The ultimate middlemen. They connected China in the east with Rome and the Mediterranean in the west. Indian traders learned the caravan routes across Central Asia very quickly and just masterfully exploited their position.
What were they trading? What flowed through India?
They were buying high-demand luxury goods, Chinese silk, obviously, spices from Southeast Asia, pepper, cinnamon, ginger. Then they'd trade their own stuff, excellent cotton cloth, animals sometimes,
And sell it
mark it
west.
up, and sell it on to Roman and other Western merchants, demanding payment in gold and silver. And we know this happened on a huge scale because
Roman coins.
massive quantities of Roman coins have been found buried in India. Direct physical proof of that incredible wealth flowing eastwards.
And trade wasn't just about goods and money, it was a vector for culture, too.
A huge vector.
Mm.
As Indian merchants traveled sailing, crossing deserts, they weren't just carrying cargo. They carried their culture, their art styles, their architecture, and critically, their religions.
Especially Buddhism.
Buddhism, in particular, spread like wildfire thanks to these trade routes. All through Southeast Asia, into Central Asia, maybe even reaching parts of Africa and Arabia. India wasn't just an economic hub. It was a global cultural engine during this whole period.
Okay, that paints a really rich picture of classical India. These cycles of centralization, collapse, revival, this incredible cultural and scientific flourishing.
Yeah.
Let's pivot now. Across Asia, same time period, roughly, the Han Dynasty in China, a different blueprint for empire.
A very different focus, yes. Same timeline, more or less, as the Mauryans and Guptas. But where India often leaned into philosophy, abstract math, the Han, they were all about centralized administrative structure and tangible material technology, tech designed to empower the state, make bureaucracy run smoothly.
The founder, Liu Bang, 202 BC, he seems to have learned from the mistakes of the dynasty right before him, the Qin. They collapsed fast.
He definitely learned that lesson. The Qin were famously brutal, overly harsh. Liu Bang knew that created resentment, instability. So he established a truly centralized government. Yes, one that lasted 400 years. But key difference, he immediately lowered taxes and significantly reduced those harsh Qin punishments.
Gaining popular support.
Right, building stability from the ground up. It allowed the dynasty to really take root and endure.
Then comes the big expansion under Emperor Wudi. How big did the empire get? And why expand so much?
Wudi really pushed the borders out, reigned 141 to 87 BC, expanded the empire almost to the size of modern China. He fought back nomadic groups to the north, conquered territories that are now parts of Korea, Vietnam.
Why? Resources? Security?
Both. Securing borders against external threats was huge, protecting the core structure, and controlling resources and, importantly, those trade routes, the beginnings of the Silk Road from the Chinese side.
But the Han's truly lasting legacy, the structural innovation everyone points to, isn't military, it's that bureaucracy, the civil service system.
Arguably one of the most important administrative inventions ever, period. Think about it. Running an empire that vast millions of people, you need officials everywhere, from the emperor's court right down to the smallest village.
And the civil service was the system to find and place those officials.
Exactly. And crucially, based on merit, not just who your father was or who you knew.
How did they measure merit? What was the structure?
The exam, a famously difficult multi-day examination. And what did it test?
Confucianism.
Deep knowledge of the writings of the philosopher Confucius. This was genius, in a way.
Yeah.
Confucianism provided the state with this unified moral and ethical code, respect for hierarchy, duty, tradition. By making the exam about that, the Han ensured every official everywhere shared the same basic philosophy of governance, the same structural ideology.
So it wasn't just about being smart. It was about being loyal to the state's way of thinking. Did it actually allow for social mobility? Could a poor kid make it?
In theory, yes. It was one of the only paths for a commoner, someone not from the nobility, to rise to power and wealth. But
The reality was different.
the reality was that mastering those texts took years of dedicated study, years of tutoring. So usually only families worthy enough to afford that kind of education could actually get their sons through the exams.
Creating a specific class.
Exactly. It created this highly educated scholar gentry class, deeply invested in the Confucian system, loyal to the emperor. They became the administrative backbone of China for centuries.
Okay, so you have this massive bureaucracy, a big army, constant expansion. How did they pay for it all? Besides the monopolies we'll get to.
Taxes, of course.
Mm.
Farmers, the base of everything, paid taxes in crops. Merchants paid taxes on their goods. But like in Gupta, India, there was also a labor demand.
The labor tax again?
Yep. Peasants had to work 1 month every year on huge government projects. Mandatory labor. That's how they built and maintained the big stuff, dams, canals, roads, and maybe most famously, the Great Wall defenses. That structure needed constant upkeep.
Now, technology. If the Guptas gave us zero, the Han gave us things that had an immediate practical impact. Let's start with the big one, paper.
Paper. Developed around 8105, you could argue it was the biggest revolution in information management until the printing press, centuries later.
Before paper, what did they use?
Cumbersome strips of bamboo, Expensive silk. Imagine trying to run that massive Han bureaucracy, keep all those records on bamboo strips.
Nightmare. So how did paper change things structurally?
Total game changer. Paper was cheap,
Yeah.
light, relatively durable. It meant books and literature became way more available. Literacy probably increased. Education spread, and critically for the Han state.
Bureaucracy fuel.
Exactly. It made record-keeping, storage, communication across those vast distances so much easier. The whole administrative structure could suddenly handle way more complexity, more information. It scaled up.
And that invention didn't stay in China.
No, but it spread slowly. Immense value, slow transfer, moved west gradually into Central Asia, later picked up by the Islamic world, Middle East, Africa, and finally, centuries later, Europe gets it around the 14th century. That tech gave China a huge head start in governance, in knowledge management, a real structural advantage.
And with that booming population, feeding everyone was crucial. Agricultural tech.
Vital. The emperors constantly stressed farming as the most important work. They knew the peasant class was the foundation. This focus led to inventions like a new two-bladed plow.
More efficient.
Much more efficient, allowed farmers to cultivate more land with less effort, absolutely necessary to feed everyone.
The government also kept tight control over key industries. Monopolies?
Monopoly control, yes. Complete power over production, distribution of things like iron, salt, coins, alcohol.
Why? What was the point?
Several reasons. Consistent quality, stable prices, but mostly guaranteed revenue straight to the central government, reliable income streams, and then, of course, the big one, silk.
The famous silk monopoly, their secret weapon.
Absolutely. By keeping how silk was made sericulture a total secret within China, they created this artificial scarcity. Massive demand for it across the trade routes, especially in Rome. Romans practically treated high-quality silk like gold.
So it was a strategic economic structure.
Hugely strategic, guaranteed wealth, commercial superiority for the Han.
Beyond land tech, they were innovating at sea too. Navigation.
Definitely. The invention of the compass around 200 BCE, using magnetism to find north. Think how huge that is for travelers, especially at sea or on cloudy nights when you can't see the stars. Makes travel structurally safer, more predictable.
And their ships, the junks.
Chinese junks were way ahead of their time. Advanced hull designs, rudders for much better steering, and the really clever bit, multiple separate watertight compartments in the hull.
So if you get a leak.
If one compartment floods, the others stay sealed. The ship doesn't necessarily sink, it slows the flooding, might prevent it entirely. Made their maritime trade much, much safer. Structural resilience built right in.
Okay, running an empire that size, conquering all these different peoples. How did the Han keep it all together? Ensure coherence.
Deliberate policy. Assimilation. The goal was actively encouraging conquered peoples to adopt Chinese ways. Chinese customs, Chinese institutions.
How'd they encourage it?
They set up schools to teach Chinese language, Confucian values. They promoted intermarriage between Han Chinese and local populations. They'd even appoint local leaders to government posts, but within the Chinese system, slowly knitting these diverse regions into a more unified cultural fabric, trying to build a shared identity structure.
We should also touch on gender roles. Sources mention Confucianism heavily influencing this.
Yes, Confucian ideals put a huge emphasis on hierarchy, social duty, and that often meant limitations for women, generally expected to focus on the home, serve husbands, raise children. That was the dominant structure.
But any nuance there?
Some. It's important not to oversimplify. While the structure was definitely patriarchal, some upper-class women could get educated or wield influence indirectly through their husbands or families. So not entirely monolithic, but certainly highly restrictive for most women.
So we see these two massive empires, India and China, masters of centralized structure, incredible innovators, yet both ultimately fell apart due to internal problems. What was the structural flaw that brought down the Han?
At the end of the day, it boiled down to that widening gap between the rich and the poor. The very thing Liu Bang tried to avoid at the start.
How did it happen?
Well, that civil service system, while theoretically merit-based, ended up favoring the wealthy scholar gentry who could afford the education. And these powerful landowning families, they got very good at dodging heavy taxes.
While the poor paid more.
Exactly. The burden fell disproportionately on the poor peasants, the backbone of the economy. Heavier taxes, more labor demands. It created massive resentment, led to peasant rebellions, instability at court. The whole system started to fray.
Didn't someone try to fix it? Wang Mang.
Wang Mang, yes, a fascinating interlude. A high official who actually seized the throne for a brief period, a radical reformer.
What did he try to do?
He tried to tackle the inequality head-on. redistribute land from the rich landowners back to the poor peasants, minted new money to try and stabilize the economy, really bold structural reforms.
But it didn't work.
Tragically, no. Right when he was trying this, a massive, devastating flood hit the Yellow River, caused chaos, famine, sparked renewed rebellion. He was overthrown.
And the dynasty came back.
It was restored for a while, the later Han. Enjoyed some prosperity initially, but that fundamental problem, the huge gap between rich and poor, it never went away. It just festered. And eventually that internal economic instability led to the final collapse by AD 220.
Wow. Okay. That is a ton of incredibly detailed, structured information we've covered. Two vast civilizations, administration, tech, rise, fall, contrasts, comparison.
Whirlwind tour through 750 years.
Indeed. And now we get to that most unusual part of our sources today, the structural guide for communication itself. Why on earth would a deep dive into ancient history include basically a writing guide?
Well, think about it. We've just seen how crucial structure was for these empires to last, right? Chandragupta needed administrative structure. The Han needed bureaucratic structure helped by paper. So you, the listener, need intellectual structure to make sense of all this complex information, to synthesize the rise and fall of two global powers without getting lost. This model they included, the hamburger paragraph, it's actually a perfect blueprint. For analytical writing, sure, but also just for clear thinking.
The hamburger paragraph. All right, let's break it down and maybe use it to summarize what we've just learned. It starts with the topic sentence, the top bun.
The top bun, your main idea, tells the listener exactly what you're about to argue or explain. So, reflecting on the font, for example, the Han Dynasty achieved remarkable structural longevity through its centralized bureaucracy, but ultimately collapsed due to persistent internal economic inequality. Clear statement. That's your destination.
Got it. Then come the layers of evidence. The supporting sentences, numbers 1, 2, and 3. The fillings. And you said, crucially, they need to start with transition words.
Absolutely crucial. Transition words are the glue. They guide the listener smoothly from one piece of evidence to the next. So for filling #1, using Han administration as evidence, specifically, the merit-based civil service exam created a stable class of Confucian officials, ensuring consistent governance across their vast territory for centuries. C, specifically, introduces the example.
Okay. Filling #2. Maybe bring in the technology.
Good idea. Furthermore, the invention of paper revolutionized their record-keeping, which allowed the complex administration needed to manage millions of people in vast trade networks, thereby strengthening central control. Furthermore, adds another supporting layer, building the case.
And filling #3 needs to address the contradiction, the reason for the fall.
Right. Time for contrast. However, this very structure relied on a tax system that increasingly burdened the peasantry while allowing elites to avoid payment, creating a destabilizing wealth gap that ultimately fueled a rebellion and the dynasty's failure. However, signals that shift, that flaw in the structure.
Perfect. That leaves the conclusion sentence. The bottom bun. Wrapping it all up.
Bottom bun refers back to the top bun, gives that sense of closure. Use a concluding transition. Therefore, despite their groundbreaking administrative and technological successes, the Han Dynasty's demise demonstrates that unchecked economic inequality can undermine even the most innovative and centralized state structures. Reinforces the main point. Clean finish.
It really forces clarity, doesn't it? And the sources even give us a toolkit for those essential transition words and phrases.
Your rhetorical toolkit. Essential for connecting ideas. Need to give an example. Use specifically, for instance in particular. Need to prove or elaborate. Add more support. Furthermore, in addition, besides, need to contrast ideas. However, nevertheless, on the other hand, just want to emphasize a point. Certainly, obviously, undoubtedly. And to wrap up, to conclude, in conclusion, therefore, consequently, knowing which tool to use when makes your thinking and your communication so much clearer.
Okay, let's synthesize then. We've covered India giving the world 0, the decimal system, proof the earth is round, plus profound religious shifts with Asoka, the Guptas. At the same time, China develops the civil service, paper, the compass, those amazing junks. Both absolutely mastered the art of the strong, centralized, structured empire.
And tracing both journeys highlights this really critical and frankly repeating pattern in history, doesn't it?
Which is?
Both the Mauryan Gupta empires and the Han Dynasty hit their peaks because of highly structured, centralized rule and incredible innovation. But both eventually fell apart, not primarily due to external enemies, but because of that persistent internal failure to manage socioeconomic inequality.
The rich getting richer, the poor bearing the burden.
Exactly. The very structures that created that immense central power, the tax systems, the land ownership patterns, also seem to inherently create the conditions, like tax evasion and land accumulation by elites that concentrated wealth and ultimately destroyed the state's own stability from within.
So it seems like the foundations needed for greatness often contain the seeds of their own destruction if they don't account for fairness,
Yeah.
for equity.
It really poses a powerful question for you, the listener, to think about. We see this pattern again and again across different civilizations, different eras. Centralization plus innovation leads to peak power. But internal inequality seems to inevitably lead to collapse.
Mm.
Is that cycle just baked in? Is it inevitable that the structures creating great wealth also generate the instability that tears them down?
Or is there another way?
Or
Yeah.
does an alternative answer lie, maybe, in that different structural model we glimpsed? The ancient Tamil South in India, with its matriarchal possibilities, passing property, maybe even power through the female line, could that create a fundamentally different system of resource distribution? Maybe more stability? That structural divergence. Perhaps it holds a deeper clue we often overlook.
That is an excellent, provocative thought to end on. You now have, we hope, a much clearer understanding of two foundational classical empires and, importantly, the structural tools to organize and articulate that knowledge. Go forth, explore these patterns of power, innovation, and inequality further.